Welcome to a not-so-deep dive into the idea of fate. The idea of fate has changed throughout the flow of time. I'll use ancient history, classical antiquity, the Middle Ages, and contemporary history all as benchmarks in this video to track the change of fate. Ancient history covers the years 3000 BC to 476 AD. Here, we'll focus on ancient Egypt. Fate was seen as a mixture between divine intervention and individual actions. People of Egypt believed that when a person is born, fate has already been decided. Shai would determine what will happen to them. Shai is the Egyptian deity of fate, or destiny. Shai and fate are seen as male, while Shayet is the female counterpart. They believe that Shai chooses the length of each person's life and is with them until they are tried in the underworld. Ancient Egypt wasn't as big on philosophers as maybe ancient Greece was, but they still had them. Egyptian philosophers weren't really philosophical as we might think today. They expressed their ideas through religious texts, proverbs, and teachings. Mata is a fundamental concept representing order, justice, truth, and balance, which are all vital for the cosmos and human society. Classical antiquity is a subgenre of ancient history. It lasted from 8th century BCE to 5th or 6th century CE, using Greek era mythology and philosophers. Honing in on the mythology side of Greece, the Modi, or the Fates, are three goddesses that control people's fates. Modi translates from ancient Greece as allotted portions, or share. This makes sense because the Modi are the weavers of fate. There are three goddesses. The first is Klathos. Her role is a spinner. Before people are born, she spins the thread of their life. Homer, in the Odyssey, writes, quote, "He must look to me whatever his own fate and the stern Klathos twist into his thread of destiny." End quote. The second goddess is Lychis. Her name translates to the allotter. She was in charge of measuring each person's thread and choosing how long each soul lived. The last Modi is Atraptos. She is the one to cut someone's life thread. This fits as her name translates to the unturnable, or she who cannot be turned. Our way into the philosophical side of Greece, we have pre-Socrates from 6th to 5th century BCE. Here, during this time, 4 major philosophers took to fame, but really only 2 really focused on the idea of fate, Heraclitus and Parmenides. Heraclitus is famous for his idea that everything flows, like a constant change, while on the other side is Parmenides. He thought reality was one, or unchanging and eternal. The next era of Greek philosophers was the classical period. They lasted from 5th to 4th century BCE. Socrates is one of the most well-known philosophers in history, period. He believed in the power of divination and divine providence. Essentially, his idea was that fate and the gods play a role in human life. The next big philosopher was Aristotle. He may have influenced the Middle Ages. He was a Greek philosopher at heart. He believed that everything happened for a reason. People have the ability to act against their knowledge of what is good, giving spotlight to the idea of choice. The last philosophers were during the Hellenistic era, and they were the Stoics. They believed in causal determinism, which means that every action is caused by a prior action, implying a predetermined course of events. The Stoics also highlighted free will, saying that people have control over their lives and judgment, letting them choose how they respond to events. Just looking at these 2 eras, we can see how fate has changed from 3000 BC to 6th century AD. Skimming through the medieval eras, the major points are the Wheel of Fortune and its relation to Christianity. The Wheel of Fortune belongs to the goddess Fortuna. She spins the wheel at random, changing the position of those on the wheel. Some people suffer misfortune, while others gain. Now, relating the connection to Christianity, we need to look at the philosophers. First, St. Augustine of Hippo was renowned on his ideas of grace, free will, and the nature of God. He wrote about grace, sin, and predestination. He helped shape the Christian doctrine while influencing both Protestant and Catholic traditions. He combined classical philosophical ideas with his theologian ones, making him one of the founders of Christian philosophy. He would defend Christianity from paganism and explore the Holy Trinity, which is a core doctrine of Christianity. Another philosopher during this time was William of Ockham. He was alive during the 14th century. He was also a theologian and was best known for his principle of parsimony, most commonly known as the Occam razor, which advocates for simple explanations when faced with multiple possibilities. Theology, as I mentioned earlier, is the idea that truths are revealed through faith and scripture rather than logical reasoning. He was also a prominent figure in nominalism. Nominalism is the idea that denies the existence of universal concepts or abstract entities beyond individual things. He argued that names are concepts created by the mind, aren't real things existing independently of the individual instance that they refer to. Some scholars argue that his views are actually conceptualism, where universals are mental concepts rather than simply names, rather than nominalists. Occam razor states that, quote, entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily, end quote, and encourages using the simplest explanation or theory that adequately explains the phenomenon, saying that when faced with multiple explanations, the one that posts fewest entities or assumptions is likely the correct one. Because of his absolute faith, he refused to believe that theology was a science. Which he was right. And he disapproves of the attempts to prove the existence of God through philosophical arguments. Most philosophers during this age were theologians. Looking at the previous era and comparing it, this era was much more focused on the thought of deities controlling their lives rather than Greek philosophers. This last era I will be discussing is modern history. This era of fate had a whole makeover, with only a few ideas really staying around. Disclaimer! This is the point of the video where it changes from me trying to be as factual and unbiased as possible to me shoving my opinions into every nook and cranny I can. This era of fate changed completely, and not at all. Yes, the idea of fate had changed in some ways, but it also reverted to some of its old ideas. How we see fate now and how maybe Aristotle might have seen it are completely different. How he might have seen it was in people and plays. Those are really the only places he would have had exposure to it. We consume fate in so many ways, whether it be books, movies, or even what we see with our own eyes. It's so different than what anyone else will ever see because we all interpret it differently. How fate is portrayed in media now is all over because everyone's idea of fate is unique. Some people see it as a controlling force, like an external power that dictates events beyond a person's control. This can lead to predetermined outcomes. This leads me to explain why fate has changed and stayed the same. Some may think of fate as being powerful and choosing what you'll do. This isn't a new idea. We've seen this predominantly in ancient Egypt with the god Shai. Moving to how they differ, it's really with the individual people. Moving to how they differ, it's really with the individual people and how they deal with the idea of fate. My interpretation and my understanding is that people of ancient Egypt accepted that their life was predetermined, while people now fight with the idea that they're not in control. Fate is also seen as a guiding force. People see it as a presence in everyday life, guiding how our experiences lead to our destiny. This is also seen in the medieval era with the rise of the Christian God. Some people may argue that fate and destiny are the same, and I would agree to an extent. I believe that in some cases, fate can be a synonym for destiny, but destiny cannot always be a synonym for fate. Like how all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. While destiny, in some cases, may not be avoidable. I think that destiny is something you can choose to take or leave. They can choose to take action, or they can choose to do nothing. Either way, this will change someone's destiny, but not their fate. Some people say that fate is a series of events leading to fulfilling one's destiny, having every action building to a narrative of one's life. This again isn't an original idea. Almost every version of fate has seen in the past and is just slightly different because, as I said, everyone's opinion on fate is different. This one is similar to the Stoics. In my opinion, fate is under the role of choice. The role of choice is the idea that our choices ultimately shape our destiny. I think fate is where people are forced to make decisions that contribute to our destiny and fate. Take, for example, when you had to move out. Your parents tell you to get a house or an apartment. There are many ways you could go about this, but I'll just pick two extremes. You either get kicked out of the house or find a new place to live. Fate forces you to make decisions, whether it be good or bad. You are destined to make inevitable choices that ultimately leads to a person's fate. And that's what fate means to me.